Have you ever wondered why so many people have started filling up their bins with cold water? Or why successful founders are suddenly obsessed with breathing exercises? Here's what they know that you don't. Your hunter brain needs completely different regulation techniques to what everyone else is teaching. Chances are your hunter brain has been in high performance mode for so long that it's actually forgotten what it feels like to be in a state of true calm. Every notification, every team challenge, every new opportunity, your nervous system treats it with the same level of intensity. You're running at 100% for 16 hours a day, which is why you feel both productive but also exhausted at the same time. Here's the thing, as a hunter brain, you're wired for big picture thinking and rapid problem solving. But that same superpower makes you absorb everything around you. You feel your team's energy, sense your customers' needs instantly, and carry the excitement of every possibility like it could be the key to transforming everything. Well, today's guest is Kevin, the founder of Breatheolution. He's worked with over 3,000 people in 5 years. But Kevin's not your typical wellness guru. He's a mechanic by trade with ADHD who discovered this work after his sister's death and realized that he needed real long-term solutions. He understands what it's like when your hunter brain just won't switch off. Kevin explains why your nervous system processes everything differently to those around you, why successful hunter brain founders have this profound release when they finally feel safe, and the specific daily practice that will give you instant access to a sense of calm without dulling your edge. Right, let's get into it. Kevin, thank you very much for being here today, mate. I appreciate you taking time out of your busy diary and showing up. So before we dive into the nitty gritty of what it is that you do and like how much of a positive impact the work that you do has on many lives, I want to ask you quite a simple question. What's something absurd or unexpected that you do or have as part of your daily routine that works like absolute wonders for you?
I mean, just recently I've started to do this, and thanks for having me on, by the way. I forgot to mention that. Thanks for signing me up for this. Just recently, I've started to sort of sit just for a couple of minutes each day and just focus on nothing but the exhale for maybe 2 minutes, and I do that about 10 times a day, and that definitely helps me to center. It affects my biochemistry, my physiology. It affects my mental state, and I just tap in a few times a day. You know, just taking time to focus on my body, especially when I'm stressed. That's yeah, that works.
For sure. And I'm sure like we will definitely get into the specifics as to how that influences all of these factors from the physical to the psychological. What do you
Sure.
notice when you don't do that? If that's something that you've maybe put in place relatively recently, if there are days that, for whatever reason, busyness or what, that it gets skipped, what do you notice to be the main symptom when that's not present?
Yeah, well, I kind of got the idea really from a podcast I listened to through from Andrew Huberman, and I thought that sounds really interesting. That, in fact, I've thought since then maybe you could create some kind of an app that sets off a timer that tells you when to do that. But I often find it's when I'm feeling quite sort of stressed, or throughout the day, and I'm working. I think, yeah, I'm just literally hitting a point now where I feel less comfortable. And in those moments, that's when I just sit with the exhale and practice that. And it always does the same thing. It makes me feel better. So since I've started to do that, it has had an influence on how I am throughout the day, but it also, I think, has improved my sleep slightly as well. So just having regular intervals throughout the day where you're in regulation has definitely helped me to improve, no end.
Regulation is a key word that I'm definitely wanting to explore today because I know
Sure.
how much of an impact that's going to have on so many of the listeners. Now, you guide people through breath work, cold water exposure, trauma. But what was like the moment in your life that cracked open the door to this path that you're on now? I'm keen to hear a little bit of that journey.
Yeah. Purely by accident. And my sister died in 2019, Yvonne. She died, and she was quite young. And it was around about the time when I was struggling with alcohol abuse. I've almost certainly, Jack, I've got ADHD. I've always had it, or ADD, whatever it is you want to call it, whatever label you want to put on it. My brain is that way. Uh, Although I never knew what it was, never connected the dots with what it was, but it did lead to certain issues for me. And now that I've had an opportunity of exploring that, everything's kind of changed slightly for me. But yeah, 2019, my sister died, Yvonne. It was a horrific experience, that, and it was enough really to get me to sort of step away from the drink. And I stepped away from it. I was sort of 8 months in sober, And yeah, I literally did some breath work outside. I thought, what's it all about this? I'd read most of Wim Hof's book, Becoming the Iceman, prior to this, even prior to the death of my sister. And I never practiced breath work. I never actually carried it out physically. And one day I just decided, I'm going to give it a try. I lay on the decking outside. I put my headphones on. I listened to something on YouTube, and I did some breathing, and I held my breath for about sort of 2 minutes on the first round, and I burst into tears, and I felt so emotional, and I felt so sort of connected to my body. It was almost like I'd not really seen Kev for a long time. And when I sort of came back round, well, actually, sort of Mrs. come out at the time, and she said, what's going on? I said, I don't know. But I carried on doing it, and it was remarkable, really, what was coming up for me as an individual. And literally by chance, maybe a couple of weeks after that, I met a guy in the tattoo shop, and he said, I'm going to go and do some of this Wim Hof breathing. We're going to get in the cold water. I said, oh yeah, I've been doing some of that. It's been great. And we went down to the local reservoir, Coombs Reservoir in Chapel on the Frith in the Peak District. And we got in the cold, and it was awful. When I first got in, I ran off. It was like, oh God, it's awful. Once I got in up to my waist, once my bits got in, I was like, nah, it's not for me. But I persevered with it, and I'm glad that I did, because from that point, then I started to sort of help others go in and help others to sort of focus on their breathing. It kind of took off from there. In February 2020, I came up with the name Breatheolution. And I thought, I need to show people how this works. Unfortunately, it was kind of in this sort of lockdown period, which was difficult. But yeah, from then on, it went really. And from that point, I've worked with over 3,500 people, a lot of one-to-one work, and it's been incredibly difficult, because I'm not a therapist. I'm a mechanic by trade. I'm an engineer. It's been an incredible experience. This last 5 years has been really hard, but it's also been amazing as well in so many. So
Yeah, sure. And just curious, where do you feel the difficulty has come from? When you say that obviously working with that many people has come with its challenges.
I think just the adversity and the individuality, the um, anecdotal side of what this is, therapy, and how we can use it, and using cold and breath as a stressor to activate certain parts of the nervous system that are sometimes lay dormant or pushed back. I found it really, really difficult to work with so many different individuals that are going through so many, adverse moments in their life, whether it's grief or abandonment or abuse or neglect or addiction. It's been really, really difficult to navigate for individuals, because everybody's just so different. And, the information that you get back sometimes, and not only that, sometimes you work with people that are a little bit sort of socially difficult, and that puts a different spin on it. So being able to adjust to individual needs, I think, has probably been the most difficult, whilst maintaining boundaries has been super difficult for me. But it's been a gift at the same time, because it's just given so much to me.
Imagine that as someone who sits in like a coaching and facilitating role myself, I can understand even just from like an energy absorption point of view, the amount of energy that you naturally absorb from other people, right, by being the facilitator is quite profound. I think for those who haven't truly experienced that to a level of intensity and frequency, don't really understand what that means. But it's like, if you have ever been in one of those, even like a leadership role, let's say somebody who's listening and they're in a leadership role and they have a team of 10, it's like, it's your responsibility to absorb and a lot of the energy of the 10 team members that you have, and on a personal level, on a performance level. And that's why a lot of the time those who are in leadership roles, when they get to like the weekends, etc., they feel very tightly wound. And so I can completely understand and resonate with what you're saying there.
Yeah.
Do you recognize that, and this is more a question than anything, do you feel that people usually engage with these types of practices when they're in a place of pain more so than the desire for pleasure.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, that, Jack, to be honest, because it's like I always say to everybody, I said, look, if you open up your doors in the wellness industry, you're going to attract people that are not very well. And the fact of the matter is that everybody is anxious. It's an evolutionary part of our nervous system to detect a danger or anything that's a threat to this organism that we're sat in. So you're going to attract people that are, that are unwell. Obviously, there are people that come into the wellness industry that just want to feel better, but I would say there's a high percentage of people that are trying to undo things and try and unravel or put the pieces of their puzzle together as to why sometimes they're anxious, sometimes they're depressed, sometimes they keep self-sabotaging, etc., all the things that we do as humans to try and get back to equilibrium, to balance. So yeah, it's a difficult industry to be in, especially at the moment, with the way that the world is, everything's going crazy. But the importance for me is understanding the self, and that is probably, we're great at understanding others, but when it comes to understanding ourselves and working on ourselves, we seem to throw everything out the window. We're great at giving advice, and I still do it. I still self-sabotage on occasion, and I still fall into the same traps and habits as everybody else does, even though I'm trying to get people to follow my lead and listen to what I say. It's just part and parcel of being human.
That's it. There's a saying that I often repeat to my clients, which is that it's hard to read the label when you're inside the bottle. And I think that perfectly depicts the challenge that so many people face, is that when you are in it, it becomes very difficult to kind of analyze why we think, feel, and behave the way we do. But if you're not inside of the bottle in kind of the roles that we play, it's easier to read someone else's label, as it were, if we stick with the analogy there, and help them to recognize their blind spots and see the things that they can't see. And I think it highlights that a big part of the practice for self is really trying to get better at having tools in place, potentially like journaling, all these things, the practice that you also offer, right? And guide people through to become more aware of that label without having to always have somebody external to point out for you.
Yeah, 100%. I love that analogy as well. I mean, that's great. It it kind of really sort of fits in with what I do, is that, it only becomes manageable, our anxiety, etc. It only becomes manageable when there is some kind of theory put in place beforehand, before these tools that we're given, that we have these days, the cold, the breath, whatever it is, whichever part of the wellness industry you go down, there has to be some kind of theory in place there for neuroplasticity to take place as to how you see yourself in that, and how you use it, and why you're using it, and are you feeling any benefits to that. I mean, I've literally got it on the wall behind me here. Whether you can observe a thing or not depends on the theory you use. It is the theory that decides what can be observed, and that's from Albert Einstein. That's literally wraps everything up. You can go and get into cold water, you can go and do some breath work, but if you don't understand really why you're doing it and what it means to you to be doing it and how it's affecting your nervous system, then neuroplasticity is not really taking place for it to be effective therapy, which is why I run these courses now, because theory beforehand changes the experience.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that knowing, isn't it, that provides us with the extra insight, especially when things become like difficult. And obviously, a great deal of the work that you do is quite physically, intentionally challenging to obviously evoke like high cortisol levels and create these intentional stressors. And naturally, when engaging with practices like that, there's going to be that little voice at the back of your mind that's saying, Jack, why the fuck are you doing this? And if you don't have a good enough reason or a logical answer to come back to and anchor yourself to, we often find that when push comes to shove and we are faced with that resistance, it becomes a lot easier to no longer engage with.
Yeah, 100%, mate. Yeah, I fully agree. And this is why I think I've probably had, a fair bit of success with this. And again, it was by accident. I didn't do it intentionally. I just, got a lot from explaining to people how their bodies worked. And people were like, wow, I had no idea that was what was going on in my nervous system. I had no idea that that's how it worked. And what was going on in those moments of them saying, wow, and they'd look up into space, or I'd find them staring into space sometimes, just saying, where did you go? And they tell me where they went. It's like, I've just really worked out something from my past that, and the number of times I've heard this, Jack, I've just connected the dots as to why I've been doing this, and there you go. So you may as well go now, because it's just worth you turning up just for that, because that's where that neuroplasticity, I think, takes place. I'm not a scientist, but there's a connection there that's so important. And I think probably what separates effective therapy is the theory. So that's what I've always done, and this is what I teach my instructors to do now. I say, look, tell your story, tell the story of evolution, talk to people that, tell them what happens when they take their first breath, tell them what's going on in the body and in the brain when that happens, explain to them the difference between safety and vulnerability, and what the animal is going through that process. And that is what we're sat in right now, and it helps people. It does help.
Like you say, it allows them to make sense of the current situation they're in. And then I'd imagine, which I've got a question that I want to find out more about in a moment, when they're in the space and they start, as you say, connecting the dots, that's when you have those breakthroughs. And that feeling of a breakthrough is a feeling, right? And it's where new synapses that have never communicated before now start to communicate. And that's why it's like you're able to now articulate things in a way that you never would have conceived of being able to do before. And that breakthrough and connecting the dots is literally connecting two synapses in your brain that have never spoken.
Sure. 100%. Yeah. And I think just by explaining to somebody, and if you go on social media, you'll check this out yourself, and you'll probably never look at somebody getting in the cold the same again. Almost every human being that I've ever taken in the cold has closed their eyes. Almost every human being that I've ever taken into cold water has looked down. Now, there's reasons for those human habits, and they're a little bit avoidant, maybe, but they're also maybe a bit like a habit of switching out, or maybe trying to sort of hide a little bit. And you'll notice this now when you go onto these websites and you go onto certain social media platforms, and you'll see people in the cold, their shoulders start to come up, their heads start to go down. So they'll start to disappear a little bit. Now, if you make somebody aware that they're doing something like that, and you try and get them to remain sort of a little bit more in command, and they're not exit checking, and they're not performing the same habits that they would normally perform when they're vulnerable, are you then changing how the brain witnesses you when you're vulnerable? If you're taking some of that command back, and it's working, Jack, and this is what I'm training people all over the country now to be able to witness people and say, look, you're doing it now. Just bring your gaze back up. Just literally just scan the horizon. Don't move too suddenly, because the brain connects that to fight or flight, the past, regression, anything that you've been through in the past. It's trying to get you to come out of this uncomfortable situation, and it's working, because you're performing habits of trying to get back to safety. But if you highlight that to somebody, they're like, oh my God, I'd never realized that. When I get in the cold now, I don't do that. I'm here regardless of the temperature. I'm in that controlled space, and that's, for some people, it's potentially life changing.
It's really interesting. I can, as someone who has exposed themselves to cold water frequently in the past, never thought about it previously, but can recall upon almost like making self smaller. Like you make yourself smaller, as you say, your gaze is often down as opposed to up. We can say, oh, I'm naturally trying to preserve heat or whatever it is, but it is like smaller self, right? It's like I feel naturally very vulnerable. I'm in a lot of discomfort physiologically and evidently psychologically as well. And it's, as you say, almost like this regression into maybe like a childlike state, which I'd imagine is where, yeah, I like that. That's cool. Yeah, that's literally on the money, right?
Yeah, that's the cover of my book.
That's
So
cool.
don't look down, witness.
For those who listening as opposed to watching. What did you just show me?
Yeah, so basically this is a cover that obviously with the help of artificial intelligence, a likeness of me, but it's a picture of a man with his head up, who looks confident and in command, and he's in an open water in the lake, and there's a silhouette of him, the child version of him, who's kind of shriveled up, head down, hands clasped together, who looks vulnerable. And by being basically the reason that's on the front cover is because I want people to understand the little boy's still there, the little girl is still there. Everything that sort of child went through, especially in that early time between the ages of 0 and 10, that sort of nurture period, that is sometimes what you're feeling in the cold. You're sometimes feeling back to regressively to an earlier version of you, head down, and this, you know. So if you coach people in such a way that they recognize those versions of themselves, are they getting a different version of the therapy? Does it then become cold water therapy as opposed to just cold water immersion?
Interesting. Do you find that there's resistance for people to go down that conversational path of exploring the state of that child version of themselves internally?
Yeah, because like me, they could have spent a lifetime avoiding that child, and for obvious reasons a lot of the time, for valid reasons, is that sometimes it's just a little bit too painful. Sometimes it's hard to go back to times where we were very vulnerable because we don't want to feel it. But the fact of the matter is that we kind of have to feel it again to be better. We have to feel it again, and we have to play with it a little bit. And whether that's journaling about it, or whether it's getting into the cold, or whether it's Reiki, or whether it's fasting, we have to make ourselves uncomfortable and vulnerable to feel better. There's just so much science out there now to suggest that that's what's happening. And with exercise is the same. It's just another level of vulnerability, I suppose.
Which leads me on to a curiosity that I have, which you spoke on earlier. So if I circle back around to what you mentioned, where you tried your first cold water immersion, I believe, and you found yourself in tears. Uh, that seems to be a relatively common experience for a lot of people at some point through the water immersion journey, let's call it, that they go on. Why does that happen? Why does it all of a sudden evoke this like outpour inside of us?
Well, basically, I cried when I did the breath work, okay, and not so much the cold water. But since I started this, there have been hundreds and hundreds of men and women that have just broken down in there. And sometimes, you see, the thing is with cold water is that it activates the nervous system very specifically. And one of the first times that we ever felt vulnerability was when we came out, and potentially that was colder than what it was like when we were inside mum. And we all came here the same way. So cold has a very specific connection to your fight or flight response. And not only that, we have 10 times more cold receptors on the skin than we have heat receptors. So it's rapid. And the instinct to get back to safety from cold water, not necessarily cold air, cold water is quite unique. So it activates a very specific, I think, direction of your fight or flight response. And because instinctively your body's trying to get back to safety, potentially your body will use anything to try and get you back there. Sometimes it's anger, sometimes it's avoidance, sometimes it's exit checking, sometimes it's tears. Sometimes people just can't hold it back. Sometimes they're tears of joy. Sometimes they're tears of relief, but more often than not, it looks like vulnerability. I have some videos, when I video people on my GoPro when they get in, and some of these are ex-Royal Marines. These are tough people, men and women, and they get in there and they start to wobble a bit, and I think, and sometimes I just say it's okay, and in that moment, if they feel safe enough, they'll let go. If they don't, they'll come back here again. They'll start to stare. They'll pick a point on the horizon and they'll say, not yet, not here. They'll go back into the military again and they'll push it back. And that's okay. That's fine. If you're not ready, you're not ready. But it does invoke this certain level of vulnerability, cold water. Bearing in mind, there's been so many times in the past when we've been cold, and more often than not, when we've been cold, especially when we were younger, we were nurtured, which is why before people get in the cold, they perform certain habits like this. Oh, I'm like, what are you doing? They don't know they're doing it, but their mother probably did it. It's kind of self-soothing a little bit. You're kind of warming yourself up. So that's a habit that your body's introduced to you and it's shown you to try and get you back to safety. And when people, before they get in the cold, they do this. Okay, shoulders forward. How do I look? I look vulnerable. So why would you go into a situation that you're trying to use to try and be stronger by putting your body into a physical position of vulnerability? So I don't allow anybody to do this before they get in the cold. This is what people do before they step into cold showers, you know? So it's just being able to identify the whole process of cold exposure. So the day before, the morning, your rituals, the things that you do to make yourself comfortable, putting your dry robe in the same place each time so that you're ready for when you come out. I try to get people to avoid doing things like that because you're still trying to make it more comfortable, or do it, but just be aware that you're making it more comfortable, with your woolly hat on, or you're taking a cup of coffee in with you. They're avoidant, I think.
Before we go further, could you do me a tiny favor? Could you just move your mic a tiny bit away from your mouth?
A tiny bit away from my mouth. There we go. Is that a little bit better?
That's it. It just pop filters every now and then. It's only a little bit.
That's fine. Yeah.
Spot on. Would you say the same is true then with breathwork? I know you mentioned that breathwork was actually the thing that induced the tears for you at that time. Is it similar kind of autonomic response as cold water? Is there a difference? And if so, I'd be keen to hear the difference between the two.
Yeah. There's definite sort of correlation and connection with that because of the nature of what your breathing does. Your breathing is an emotional regulator in your body. It's used when we're nervous. It's used when we're frightened. It's used in fight or flight. It's used when we're vulnerable. And the first breath that you ever took, when your lungs emptied of fluid when you were a baby, was a gasp and inhale through the mouth generally. And once that takes place, then kind of the brain sort of maybe connects the gasp and the inward breath to vulnerability, fight or flight response. So when you breathe in a certain way, it's going to activate your nervous system, has to go back and predict again. The brain predicts, this is uncomfortable. Is it this? Is it that? Was it that time when that happened? Was it that when he did that? Was it when she did that? Is this when you were trying to recover from this? So the brain will search all over the way to try and get you to come back to normal again. And by default, generally, something will happen as you're breathing that will invoke some kind of a response. Which is why you see these videos on social media where people are, they're bursting into tears. They're having these huge kind of what they call, like these releases of trauma. And it's all the same system. It's the predictive nature of the brain and nervous system to try and get you back to physical equilibrium. Darwin wrote about it in a book in 1872. He said the purpose the purpose of human emotion is to activate a mobilization response in the animal to get it back to physical equilibrium, which is to balanced safety, basically. So generally, once that happens, then you kind of come back down again. But also what you've done in that moment is you've kind of taken the lid off Pandora's box a bit because you've put your body into a state that it was in once. So yeah, so it's pretty much the same. Can you be re-traumatized with breathwork? 100%, just the same you can do with the cold. So some people are just not ready to get into 5-degree ice baths, because it's too heavy for somebody who's got PTSD. Maybe it's too heavy for somebody who's anxious or somebody who's been abused. Gently take them through maybe 15 degrees. The likelihood is that I've probably re-traumatized people in the past, but just by not knowing really what's going on in the human body and the levels of it, the dimmer switch. It's not just, oh yeah, this happens and that happens, and then you become sympathetic, parasympathetic. It's all kind of on a dimmer control, and every experience is completely different. It's completely individual to the person who's doing it.
So if this is somebody's first introduction to breathwork, cold water exposure, and so on, what would your overarching description be to explain to someone what it is that you offer through like the practices and the tools, what they are independently, and the benefit they could bring to someone, and who is that certain someone that really does benefit from it as well?
Yeah. So basically, I think what I offer is more of the theory side of it, because I think that the theory is really important. A lot of people are just stepping into the physical because it's impactful. So yeah, I want to try that. Yeah, that's gonna, and then they do it, and then they don't really know why. They've not really connected the dots as to what's really just gone on in that 20-minute breathwork session. They've not really studied it. They've just gone home and think, yeah, I feel a bit more relaxed now. Yeah, see you, and then crack on with their day. I think what I offer is the specific knowledge by going through a certain storyline. So when I work with an individual, I take them all the way back for their first breath, all the way through childhood. What were your nicknames? What was your favorite toy when you were a kid? It starts the brain off on a path of connection as to why you are the way you are. And then once you have that kind of information, or you have an idea of it, it alters the experience to make it maybe a different type of therapy. Okay. I'm not trying to say that, getting into a group session in a lake on a Sunday morning, getting out, doing the horse dance and dancing about, having some hot chocolate and some cake and having a dance around with your friends, it's therapy, 100%. It's great for you. But there's levels to that. So what I offer is, especially with these online sessions, is in that hour, I'll break down your nervous system response to stress and how that works, and why yours is different, completely different to everybody else. But it will set you off on a journey of, crikey, maybe that did affect me, or wow, was that an experience that maybe molded me into the person that I am? Am I not breathing properly? Am I breathing up a chest? Am I breathing lightly? Why do I keep holding my breath on and off all day? Why do I hold my breath when I open my emails? This is an actual thing now. But holding your breath is another tool that's part of the fight, flight, or freeze response. And it's probably one of the early things that we do as a child to avoid, or to hide, or to turn away from. We see babies doing this. I've seen all my children do it. They're all right for a while. When they get to about 2 years old, they start to perform these certain avoidant behaviors where they were quite safe originally, but all of a sudden it's okay, Bill next door. What's wrong? Come on, say hello, say hello. I don't know what's the matter with him today. Something's just made him feel a little bit apprehensive, that made the baby feel a little bit, maybe a bit more unsafe. So they perform this kind of turning away of the head. They close their eyes, and then sometimes they hold their breath. They take a gasp, and that sticks. Just like your first breath sticks when it communicates with the pre-Botzinger complex in the brain. When you take that first breath, when you do something that gets you back to safety, because if you can't see it, it can't see you. So you close your eyes, you hold your breath so you can't be heard, and you move away from it. You get back to safety. So the brain then uses that as a tool to get you back to safety. People do it in the cold. They close their eyes, they turn away, they avoid. It's the same process.
What's the consequence of people doing that but not necessarily being aware of it?
So anything that you're not aware of becomes a sort of a habit. And if you look at statistics and ask people, especially people with ADHD, how many times do you recognize that you're holding your breath throughout the day? They often answer, oh, I always find myself taking in these big, deep breaths. Well, maybe that's because just prior to that deep breath, to open up your lungs and get more oxygen, you might be holding your breath. So sometimes, that can lead on to things like sleep apnea, and sleep apnea in people with ADHD is actually, it's on the increase, and snoring. That's another issue. That's another problem. But certainly holding your breath is something that you use in terms of the fight, flight, and freeze response. So if you become more aware when you're doing it and what are the triggers that are making you hold your breath, what has your nervous system witnessed that made you hold your breath and take that big deep breath in at that moment, you could start to connect the dots as to what triggers you as an animal.
So many of like people that I speak to and most hunter brains, they spend a large portion of their time, whether this is conscious or not, feeling anxious, distracted, or on edge. What would you say is like really happening in their nervous system when they live like that, in that permanent state?
Well, there's so much science now being carried out with, and experiments and research being carried out now in terms of stress and how it manifests, how anxiety manifests in each individual. There's just so much going on these days, really, and life is fast paced, and these devices, these mobile devices, they're adding to that, and the more we have access to, I think the worse it's getting for people. And just by switching some of this off, it generally helps, which is why, getting back into nature certainly helps, because you're switching off all that other stimulus. But generally, we're not just obviously reacting to external stimulus like smells and taste and touch and sight and sound. These are very, very powerful stimuluses that are, are connected to the past, which is why generally sometimes what I do when I do sessions is I'll play a piece of music, sometimes a Christmas song, and the brain will instantly show you a slide, just like a slide projector. It's like, well, where was it? What was it? Well, I can't believe it. It was this. Or I'll play them a piece of music from kind of like their teenage era. I'll say, what do you think of that? Wow, that just showed me this. So the brain is rapid in terms of how it connects stimulus, especially sound and smell. So again, it's being aware of what triggers you on a day-to-day basis, and what stimulates that fight or flight response, or that breath hold, or what images are shown to you in those moments. It's a very complex system. So your original question though, Jack?
No, it's interesting because it leads me to another question, which is so many people are unaware of their nervous system and whether it is regulated or dysregulated. And likely a lot of the guys that are listening are high performers, either striving or currently, typically with either some form of performance or business related endeavor. And as a result, they spend the majority of their time unknowingly in a dysregulated state. What is the consequence of being dysregulated for a prolonged period of time? Like, how does that what's the consequence? And then also, how does it manifest so that they can potentially pick up on some of those signals?
Yeah, so I suppose if your breathing isn't regulated, and again, this isn't just I'll just change my breathing. There's so many factors. Obviously, what you eat, how you sleep, where you live, the amount of exercise that you do. There's just so much that we have to do to meet that equilibrium. It's not always possible. You can't be in equilibrium all the time. It's not possible. But by making changes to some of these things that we do, we can start to improve it. But certainly if you're not sleeping well, if you're waking up in the morning with a dry mouth, if you're snoring at night, if you've got high blood pressure, if you notice yourself feeling hot all the time, if you're getting pins and needles and tingles, these are signs really that your nervous system might be in fight or flight, maybe too much. If you're feeling tired all the time, you've got these high cortisol levels all the time, how much stress is your nervous system having to deal with all the time? So this is where these moments of down regulation can just the body's kind of just taking a sigh of relief, because it's stepping out of that fight or flight state. And James Nestor speaks about this in his book Breath. If you're constantly in a state of fight or flight, the nervous system's on high alert all the time, and you're kind of being drip fed noradrenaline all the time. And this is constantly increasing cortisol in the body. This is tightening up your blood vessels, and your vascular system, your arteries, it's reducing blood flow, it's increasing blood pressure, it's increasing contractility of the heart, it's interfering with your biochemistry, it's keeping you in a dysregulated state so that you can't really get on socially, because environments appear to be unsafe when they're not. And for somebody who's had ADHD all my life, when I was in my late teens, early 20s, when I'd go out into clubs and stuff, my mates would say, I'd be talking to my mate at the bar and be like, God, Kev, are you deaf? And I'm talking here to them, face to face. Like, sorry, I can't hear you, mate. So I was like, are you deaf? And I actually asked my doctor, I think I might be going deaf. But what was going on with me is that because I was constantly on high alert, I wasn't listening. I couldn't really hear my friend talking because I was taking on the surroundings. I was taking on the alpha males in the room. How did I look to the opposite sex? The music, the sweat dripping off the ceiling, this gin and tonic order going wrong. But in high alert in a situation that I didn't really have to be in high alert in. And now I can stand far away from somebody in a crowded room and I can hear exactly what they're saying because I'm just there. And that can be life changing for some people, especially people with ADHD.
Absolutely. And I can see how that manifests for so many people, where you're constantly in that heightened, dysregulated state when, as you say, in the fight, flight, or freeze state, when it's not appropriate to be. So obviously it's a survival mechanism, right, inside of us, and it serves a purpose. If there is someone who is across the road with a knife, or we see a tiger that's about to attack us, it's like, great, it actually helps us to be heightened and then flee the scene. But if we are then not able to self-regulate and have these things in place that allow us to regulate almost on demand, as it were, then we'll find, as you say, that we're often dysregulated in moments where it's not appropriate to be. And that can be when having like difficult conversations. Let's say, again, whether that be with a spouse, with a child, with an important team member. And if you're feeling dysregulated and heightened and tense, it's very easy to say things that you don't actually mean, or to come across a lot sharper than anticipated. And that could be the demise of a really important relationship.
Yep, absolutely. And again, that's the predictive brain when it's in fight or flight, predicting things that are not necessarily real. And that's what happens, I suppose, with trauma and with PTSD, is that you're in a heightened state of fight or flight all the time, and you struggle to regulate with your families. You always seem to be under attack all the time. And that's not really what's going on. Sometimes teachers are reporting that when they smile at kids, they feel threatened. So, why does one of the first things that connects you to a loving parent, which is a smile, become a threat? And why are they putting ear defenders on kids? It's because the nervous system thinks that the sound in that room is a threat and there's too much of it. Whereas that's not the actual case. It's just because that nervous system is in a high state of alert. And the answer isn't really to block the sound, it's to work with the individual to make that sound acceptable in a regulated nervous system. And this is rife. It's all over the place. And these handheld devices, they don't help. I've not got my phones up there, but when you're scrolling on these phones, a lot of the time you're witnessing something that's nice, that's cute. Oh wow, check that out. Wow, that's amazing, isn't it? Wow, oh, that's so cute. And then you swipe up. Oh God, that's awful. But you see what I've done? I've physically created a response to stress. I've taken a gasp, I've held my breath, and I've turned away and I've closed my eyes. A bit like watching a horror film. Your brain has already linked the physical movement and avoidance to the stimulus. And sometimes for kids, that's happening 300 or 400 times a day. So what is that doing to the brain? It's creating links to physical avoidance, fight or flight, and visual stimulus on these devices. This is probably why Stephen Jobs didn't give them to his kids. He knew what they were doing.
Absolutely. Do you think there's something in that as well around how frequently and fast they're going from one state to another? So as you say they're momentarily in a seemingly happier state, looking at funny cat videos or whatever, and then all of a sudden they see a bomb from the other side of the world, and it's such a fast and stark difference in like reality, let's call it. And then there's such a fast change of state, like it happens instantly, right? As you've just said, you'll scroll on it and you'll see, because some of the things that we see unknowingly is just like heinous, right? And you view it, and the amount of things I've seen where I've seen like dead people and I've seen all this crazy stuff on my phone without choice because of the algorithm, and then it's like, whoa, like straight away. And that's not a conscious thing that I'm doing, right? As you say, it's almost like creating space between me and the stimulus itself, and trying to, as you say, like brace almost. Do you think there's anything there because of how quickly that's happening, and likely how many times in a day that's also happening, that it's adding extra stress and dysregulation?
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt, it's messing with your dopamine system, because you're constantly searching for dopamine all the time when you're going through. It's like, oh, it's great, this is wonderful. Oh man, check what he's got, check what she's got. Oh, I want one of those, and then you'll swipe up again, and then you'll hear somebody talking, singing on X Factor, and it makes you emotional. Or you'll see kids in Gaza, it makes you cry. Those are physical connections, and even though you're not in Gaza, or you're not witnessing you're not in the tsunami on the beach. Is there a part of your nervous system when you go to Wales on holiday the year after, that when you get on the beach, it doesn't stimulate you slightly to that video that you watched, and you just feel a bit uncomfortable there that day?
To give you a live example, the amount of aviation incidents that have happened at the start of this year that we've been aware of through social media is rife, right? There seems to be all of a sudden a massive increase. And we're at that time of year where many people are now going away on holiday. And instantly, because of the accessibility to that information, and so many people now, like their awareness has been heightened around that, the anxiety levels around flying have dramatically increased. And that's even just like anecdotally with people that I am aware of. And it's that, right? It means that the experience of going away that people have likely done hundreds, maybe, of times in their life is now a thing. And it's now something to be highly stressed out about, because there's that association of like, well, this is a really dangerous place to be. And if we look at the
Sure.
stats, it's still not really. It's still a very, very safe, with the amount of flights that actually take place a day in comparison to the casualties that there are. But
Mm.
again, it's exposure, isn't it?
Is, and you won't change the predictive brain, because its sole purpose as an organism is to keep you safe so that you'll multiply and disappear. End of story. So you're not going to change the evolutionary patterns of the 80% negatively predictive brain. I can't remember the name. Who is it that did a recent podcast? Lisa Feldman Barrett, who wrote 7 Lessons About the Brain. She did a podcast recently. I think it was on the Stephen Bartlett podcast. And she speaks about the negative brain. When you mentioned before that you've been on your phone and you've seen dead people on your phone, as you say it, your brain lets you see it. Yeah. So you see the image of the one that was most harrowing. If just me talking about it now, your brain's showing it you. Okay. So that's exactly what goes on the plane. As soon as you see the airport, as soon as you smell the aviation fluid, as soon as you get into that environment, the brain will do what it's amazing at. It will try and get you back to safety. So if it didn't do that, we'd be dead already. The human species wouldn't exist. But unfortunately now that system is being absolutely hammered with comfort and so much adversity and so much choice and variation now that we just don't really, the species doesn't really know what to do with it, I don't think.
And to a point of where it's unproductive, I would imagine. Like, if I stick with the aviation for a second, it's like casualties happen and have always happened forever. I've just not been aware of them, which means that I have not had the heightened amount of anxiety that I could potentially have towards flying now, because I've not been exposed to it as much. But again, like statistically, that's okay, because it's still less dangerous than driving in my car. But it's almost like an unnecessary stress that I've now added to my life in just like one specific area. And again, it's like, if we accumulate all of the interactions that I have, it's like there's probably 50 countries that I'd be anxious about going to if I exposed myself to it very deeply on social media, rightly or wrongly, right? Because it's just that accessibility that I think we have now, that evokes so much anxiety around everything. Again, just one that comes to my mind as we're talking about aviation and holidays. It's like Tunisia. Remember the devastating thing that happened in Tunisia, like mid 2000s, maybe
Yeah.
2010 or something. And that's like a single isolated incident that has now pretty much eradicated tourism in Tunisia. And it's like, from a statistical objective point of view, it's still my assumption would be a relatively safe environment. But the point is, we're not objective and we're highly emotional creatures, as you've just said, with our brains. But it then can create these irrational, like multi levels of fear everywhere in your life all the time. And I think that's a contributing factor to why people feel so heightened pretty much constantly.
If we were allowed to just snap into the prefrontal cortex and just go ahead and just do things, we wouldn't be here. So the rear brain's got to put you into fight or flight. It's got to try and get you back to safety. It's rapid, which is why these practices, especially cold water therapy, if it's used correctly, can be so beneficial. But there's the other side of the spectrum where kids are watching people being beheaded online. These are 8 and 10-year-old children. They can just go online and look at these horrific things to the point where actually they'll keep watching them and it becomes safe. Now, what's that doing? Now I can watch those now because they don't bother. The first time I saw it, it gave me nightmares, whereas now it doesn't bother me. So what's that doing? So, yeah, problems.
Interesting question there. What happens for us to become almost adjusted to that stressor? It's like a adaptation, I'm assuming. We become habituated to it. What's your thoughts around that?
Well, yeah, and of course, as we know, the human body will adapt. It'll adapt rapidly, but if it's adapting in such a way that's affecting your ability to be empathetic or sympathetic, then that's causing problems. When people are getting beaten up in the street now, people are just walking by and videoing rather than saying, "Hey, come on, hey." People are just videoing it. Is that the reason why they find it amusing? Because they've just watched so much beheading and so many dogs being hit by trains and so much people being run over and limbs removed. Is it changing how humans are empathetic and sympathetic to each other? The whole world is going crazy, and especially in this country at the moment, things are in a bad way. I mean, I know my dad probably said this, but I have never known youth the way that it is now. They just don't really seem to be empathetic or sympathetic at all. So it's definitely causing problems. The disconnect with our youth now is hideous, and suicide is through the roof in teenagers, young men, and it can be avoided.
And it's a really interesting and important topic because I know we're talking about quite extreme examples here, but we see this within people in general. But I think the majority of the statistics showcase that it's men more than women in things like porn, for example. The same process takes place, right? Where there is such easy, cheap dopamine through that, and then it's not enough anymore. The fix isn't enough, so it becomes more wild and more absurd, and then you find yourself in this land far away, which is the equivalent of beheading, to get the same kind of level of fix. And again, we see this with drug usage and alcohol usage. Is that the dose always needs to be heightened until the point where it just becomes alarming and incredibly destructive. And are you then saying that these tools of breath work and cold water therapy can also double up as a means to almost like reset ourselves through the nervous system and those loops we can find ourselves in?
Certainly, and I think if you use these therapies along with maybe reducing dopamine, okay, or stripping back comfort, I think it does give the body time to adjust. I think it does give the human mind some discomfort in terms of it having enough time to kind of readjust slightly to presence and reality as opposed to something that's not real. Because most of what we deal with day to day isn't really real. This online thing and these phones, these devices, it's not real. They're not real humans and it's not real life. But it's kind of tricking the brain into thinking that it is. And it's tricking our young folk into believing that it's real, and that's changing. I think it's changing mankind. I know that's quite an elaborate thing to say, but it's really affecting people. And ADHD is all right. It's a relatively it's been known for a long time. It's been given different names, but it's literally through the roof at the moment with people being diagnosed and sometimes misdiagnosed, and some people that are on medication that shouldn't really be on the medication, and they're given the wrong medication. It makes them worse. So the real answers for me really is to have periods of time without the comfort and to get back to nature. And I think almost certainly, before long, there's going to be so many more of these camps where kids can go and put their phones in a basket and not see them for a week and just be kids. That's dramatically going to help.
I agree. I totally agree. I look forward to when we see more of those rising up into the marketplace. Now, for anyone that's listening, if they had just a couple of minutes a day to reset their nervous system, what would you suggest that they do with that?
I suppose it's a bit like meditation. Everybody thinks that, meditation is clearing the mind. It's not clearing the mind. It's just being aware of it. And it's a really hard thing to do, because when you sit there and you try and breathe and you try and focus, you're thinking about your shopping list and you're thinking about you taking your dog to the vets and picking your kids up from school. It's very hard to do. But the one way of connecting your brain to your body is by following your breath in and out of your body. It's an amazing tool. And that's why breath work is so important, I think, because it's always been there. Your breathing's always been there through all your grief, your emotional stuff. It's been there through your happiness, your joy, your laughter, the tears, so it's something that's very connected to your past. So I would say, if you could just take maybe 10 minutes out of your day to just close your eyes and focus in on your body, take a breath in, feel what the breath in feels like, really map your body on a sharp inhale. What goes on in your body when that happens? What does your heart rate do? Hold your breath for maybe, I don't know, maybe 30 seconds. What's going on in your body when that happens? Take an exhale, but recognize the difference between the inhale and the exhale. They are chalk and cheese. They do very different things in the body. One is very sympathetically driven by default, and one is very, very much connected to the vagus nerve and parasympathetically driven, slowing the heart rate down. They do different things in the body and at different levels. So focus on your breathing. Take, like I said, at least 10 to 15 minutes per day where you're just sat with your breath. It's difficult to begin with, but once you start to do it, you'll start to reap the benefits from it. It will start to become something that you can turn to, an anchor. And even while we've been doing this podcast, there have been occasions where I've just let a long breath go, and it's always the same. At the bottom of that exhale, my body always does the same thing, whether I'm sat on a plane, frightened of flying, whether I'm sat in school, about to sit an exam, whether I'm about to go into a job interview, always feels the same. So use it.
Love that. I love that. And then one of the closing questions: if you could put one truth that you truly would hang your hat on and believe in, that you want the world to see, let's say we put this billboard up in London and your truth was on this billboard in London for everybody to see, what would be on it?
Nobody loves you more than you. I think that's just so important, because I think there's so much pain in people because of self-esteem, especially these days, because of self-esteem and self-loathe, guilt, shame. All those are to do with the self. So for yourself, for the person that you are, every version of you, the baby, the 5-year-old version of you, the 10-year-old version of you, hold on, hug and hold, laugh, smile at that version of you and take care of them.
Yeah. Well, great answer. A great note to end on. And finally, where can people find more out about yourself, what you're doing and what you're working on at the moment?
So you can head to Breatheolution and breatheolution.com, breatheolution.co.uk. You can check out some of the cold water therapy or the trauma-informed cold water therapy instructor training that I'm doing coldwatersafety.co.uk. And yeah, of course, if there's the usual sort of Instagram, Facebook channels. I'm on LinkedIn as well, so you can always head there. But yeah, just work with as many people as you can. Come and work with me, but work with as many people as you can. They're all going to give you something different, something valuable.
Love that. And I'll put all the links to access your pages in the show notes as well. So urge everyone to go check them out. Appreciate you being on today, Kevin. Thank you for your time.
Pleasure, mate. Thank you so much.